The day I discovered my husband's secret life began like any other Tuesday. I was reorganizing our home office, a task I'd been putting off for months. Martin had left for work hours earlier, kissing me goodbye with the same gentle affection he'd shown for the past 15 years of our marriage. Nothing in his demeanor suggested that by sunset, the foundation of our life together would crumble beneath my feet. In the back of his desk drawer, behind folders of tax documents and warranties, I found a small key. It wasn't unusual. We all have mysterious keys to long-forgotten locks, but something about this one caught my attention. It was new, still shiny, not the kind of key that gets forgotten in a drawer for years. I almost put it back, almost. Instead, I slipped it into my pocket, a nagging curiosity taking hold. It was only when I was sorting through Martin's winter clothes later that day, preparing for the upcoming seasonal change, that I found what the key unlocked: a small fireproof box hidden beneath his sweaters. My husband was a high school English teacher, a man who read poetry for pleasure and cried at sad movies. We had no secrets, or so I thought. What could possibly warrant a hidden, locked box? Inside were documents, a driver's license with Martin's photo but a different name, credit card statements for accounts I'd never seen, receipts for gifts I'd never received, and photos, dozens of them, of Martin with another woman and 2 children, a boy and a girl who looked to be around 10 and 8. In some photos, they stood in front of a modest house. In others, they were at a beach, at what appeared to be school events, celebrating birthdays. They looked like a family. They looked happy. My first thought was so absurd that I almost laughed aloud. Martin has a twin I never knew about. But the mounting evidence was undeniable. The dates on the statements, the timeline of the photos, the systematic deception they represented. This wasn't a twin. This was my husband living a second life under the name Daniel Miller. I sat on our bedroom floor for hours, documents spread around me like the wreckage of a disaster. Each new piece of evidence was another blow. A mortgage statement for a house in Hartford, just 40 minutes from our home in Springfield. School records showing Martin, or Daniel, as the father of 2 children enrolled in a Hartford elementary school. Recent photos of family vacations taken during weeks when Martin had told me he was at teaching conferences or visiting his ailing mother in Chicago. His mother had died 5 years ago. The room grew dark as evening settled in, but I couldn't move. How was this possible? How had the man I shared my life with, my bed with, managed to build and maintain an entirely separate existence? The level of calculation required was staggering. I heard his key in the lock at 6:30, right on schedule. His footsteps, the rustle of his coat being hung by the door, the familiar sound of his briefcase settling on the entryway table. Routine sounds from a man who had perfected the art of routine to conceal the extraordinary duplicity of his life. "Beth, I'm home," he called, his voice so normal it was surreal. I didn't answer. I heard him move through the house, looking for me. When he reached our bedroom doorway, he froze. I must have been a strange sight sitting on the floor, surrounded by evidence of his betrayal. Still in the clothes I'd worn to reorganize the office that morning, my face tear-streaked but oddly calm. "What's all this?" he asked, but his face had already drained of color. He knew exactly what this was. "Who are they?" I asked, holding up a Christmas photo of the woman and children. "Who is Daniel Miller?" The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. I watched emotions cross his face in waves: shock, fear, resignation, and finally, a terrible calm that mirrored my own. My family, he said simply. And what am I? He looked at me then, really looked at me, with an expression I'd never seen before. You're also my family. How long? I whispered. 11 years. 11 years, nearly the entirety of our marriage. While I'd been planning our future, saving for the children we hadn't yet had, hosting dinner parties for his colleagues, and building what I thought was a life with a devoted partner, he had been systematically maintaining an elaborate deception. Her name is Karen, he said quietly, sitting down on the edge of our bed. The kids are Emma and Jason. Are they yours? A question with an obvious answer, given the children's ages and the timeline of our marriage. But I needed to hear him say it. Yes. Does she know about me? He shook his head. No. She thinks I work for an educational consulting firm, that I travel a lot for work. The symmetry was nauseating. Each of us waiting at home, believing the same lies about business trips and conferences. Each the unwitting participant in a charade orchestrated by the man sitting before me. How? I asked, the single syllable containing multitudes. How did you manage this? How could you do this to us? How did I not see it? It started before we were married, he began, his voice detached, almost clinical. I met Karen when I was doing my student teaching in Hartford. We started dating. Then I got the job offer in Springfield and met you. He should have ended one relationship before beginning another. That's what decent people do. But Martin, it turned out, was not decent. He was exceptionally exceptional in his capacity for deception. I loved you both, he continued. I couldn't bear to choose, so I didn't. The simplicity of that statement, I didn't, belied the extraordinary effort such a choice entailed. 2 homes maintained, 2 lives meticulously scheduled and separated, 2 women loving the same man, each believing she was his only one, the children. Emma was a surprise. Karen was pregnant when you and I got engaged. I should have told you then, broken it off with one of you, but I didn't. And then after Emma, there was Jason, and it just ... continued. Just continued. As if duplicity on this scale was something that simply happened to him, rather than a series of deliberate choices made every day for over a decade. Does anyone know? Does your brother know? Mark, Martin's younger brother, had been our best man. Had he stood at that altar, knowing his brother was committing bigamy? No, no one knows. That night, Martin or Daniel, I no longer knew what to call him, slept on the couch. I lay awake in our bed, reprocessing 15 years of memories through this new, terrible lens. The weekends he'd been grading papers at the library, the overnight trips to educational conferences, the sudden schedule changes and canceled plans when a student needed extra help. Had any of it been true? I thought of the woman, Karen, and her children, my husband's children, living their lives in Hartford, believing their husband and father was merely a hard-working man with a demanding travel schedule. Did she lie awake too, sometimes wondering why he was away so often? Did she check his shirts for unfamiliar perfume, his receipts for unexplained expenses? Or had she, like me, trusted completely? The next morning, moving as if underwater, I called in sick to the accounting firm where I worked. Martin did the same to his school. We sat at our kitchen table, 2 strangers with nothing and everything to say to each other. I want to meet her, I said. He looked up sharply. Beth, I don't think, I'm not asking. Martin, I'm telling you, she deserves to know, and I need to see her, he argued. Of course, said it would destroy her, the children, that there had to be a better way to handle this. But what could be better in a situation built entirely on lies. There was only truth now, however brutal. 2 days later, I drove to Hartford, Martin beside me in the passenger seat, tension radiating from him like heat. We had agreed after hours of painful negotiation that he would tell Karen everything first, alone. Then I would join them. The children would be at school, spared at least the immediate aftermath of their family's implosion. I waited in a coffee shop across from their home, a small Cape Cod with blue shutters and a well-tended garden. From my vantage point, I could see their front door. I watched Martin enter, and then I waited, counting minutes that felt like hours. The text came exactly 47 minutes later. We're ready. Walking up to that house was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Each step felt like moving through molasses, my body instinctively resisting the confrontation to come. The door opened before I reached it. A woman stood there, Karen, her face pale but composed. She was pretty in an understated way, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and eyes that had clearly been crying, but now held only a fierce dignity. "Beth," she said, and hearing my name from her lips was jarring. "Please, come in." The interior of their home was warm and lived in, with children's artwork on the refrigerator and family photos on the walls. Photos of my husband with his other family. The surrealism of the moment was dizzying. Martin sat at the kitchen table, looking smaller somehow than he had that morning. Karen gestured for me to sit across from her. "He's told me everything," she said, her voice remarkably steady. "At least, he says he has. I thought you and I should talk without him." She turned to Martin, who looked between us with naked fear. "You need to leave now." "Karen, I don't think you've done enough," she cut him off. "Go. We'll call you when we're ready." The authority in her voice was impressive. Martin looked at me helplessly, but I offered no assistance. He had forfeited any right to control this situation. After a moment's hesitation, he left. For several minutes after the door closed behind him, Karen and I sat in silence, two women surveying the wreckage of their lives. "How much do you know?" she finally asked. "Everything, I think. I found documents, photos. I know about the children." She nodded, then unexpectedly offered me coffee. I accepted, and there was something strangely normalizing about watching her move around her kitchen, preparing cups for us both. When she returned to the table, her composure cracked slightly. 11 years, she said, her voice catching. My entire adult life. Was any of it real? It was the same question that had been echoing in my mind for days. "I think," I said carefully, "that he did love us both, for whatever that's worth." She gave a short, bitter laugh. "Not much, as it turns out." We talked for hours about how we'd met him, the early days of each relationship, the patterns of his deceptions. We compared schedules, realized how meticulously he'd organized his dual existence. We discovered shared experiences, the same anniversary gift given in different years, the same vacation spots visited with different wives. "The children," I said at one point, "they're beautiful." Her face softened momentarily. "They are. They're the only part of this I can't regret." By afternoon, a strange solidarity had formed between us. We were not friends, could never be friends, but we were allies in the aftermath of a shared catastrophe. "What will you do now?" I asked. "Divorce him, obviously," she said. "The logistics will be a nightmare. He's legally married to you, not me. Apparently, I've been living in a common law situation without realizing it." The unfairness of this struck me forcefully. She had 2 children with this man who, legally, was my husband. I'll make sure you and the children are taken care of, I promised. Whatever happens with the divorce, his obligations to them don't disappear. She studied me for a long moment. You're being very reasonable about all this. Trust me, I've been through the rage. I'm still going through it. But none of this is your fault, or the children's. We called Martin back, eventually. He entered the house with the caution of a man walking into a minefield, which, in many ways, he was. Together, the three of us outlined the immediate next steps. Martin would move out of both homes. Divorce proceedings would begin. Financial responsibilities would be divided, with priority given to the children's needs. When I left that house in Hartford, I felt as if I'd aged a decade in a day. The woman I had been trusting, secure in her marriage, no longer existed. In her place was someone more cautious, more wounded, but also, somehow, stronger. The months that followed were a blur of legal meetings, therapy sessions, and painful conversations with bewildered friends and family. Martin's double life became public knowledge, a source of shock and gossip in both communities. He lost his teaching position when the school board deemed him too morally compromised to instruct young people. The elegant deception he had maintained for so long collapsed completely, leaving him with neither of the lives he had tried to preserve. Strangely, Karen and I maintained contact throughout the divorce proceedings. Not friendship, exactly, but an understanding born of shared experience. We coordinated our legal strategies, ensuring that both of us, but especially her children, received fair settlements. In time, I even met Emma and Jason, these children, who shared their father's eyes and mannerisms. They were confused, angry, but resilient in the way that children often are. A year after Discovery Day, I ran into Martin at the courthouse during a final paperwork signing. He looked diminished, grayer, the confident man I had married, eroded by the consequences of his actions. "How are you?" he asked, with what seemed like genuine concern. "Better," I answered truthfully. "Not good, but better." "I'm sorry," he said, words he had repeated countless times since that night in our bedroom. "I know it doesn't help, but I am truly sorry." "Why?" I asked, the question that had haunted me through sleepless nights. Why go to such extraordinary lengths to maintain two separate lives? Most affairs don't involve purchasing a second home, creating an alternate identity. He was quiet for a long moment. "I've asked myself that every day. The best answer I can give is that I couldn't bear to lose either of you. Every time I thought about choosing, ending one relationship, the pain seemed unbearable. So I just ... continued. Each deception made the next one necessary. Before I knew it, I was living two complete lives." "You lost us both, anyway," I pointed out. He nodded, eyes downcast. "The irony isn't lost on me. 2 years after my discovery, I received a text message from Karen. She was dating someone new, a widower with a daughter of his own. She sounded cautiously happy. The children were adjusting. Life was continuing. My own healing came more slowly. Trust, once shattered, is not easily rebuilt. But gradually, I rediscovered parts of myself that had been subsumed in marriage passions and interests I'd set aside. I traveled alone for the first time in years, finding a kind of freedom in solitude. I reconnected with old friends, made new ones, and eventually I opened myself to the possibility of love again, wiser, now more vigilant perhaps, but unwilling to let one man's extraordinary deception define the rest of my life. 5 years after finding that key, I attended Emma's high school graduation. Karen had invited me, a gesture that spoke to the unusual bond forged in the crucible of shared betrayal. Martin was there too, seated several rows away, a respectful distance maintained. He had rebuilt some relationship with his children, though it was complicated, tentative. As I watched Emma accept her diploma, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Sadness for what might have been had I known about these children. Might I have been a stepmother to them? Anger, still, at the choices that had been taken from me without my knowledge, but also, unexpectedly, a measure of peace. The broken vows that had shattered our lives had also, somehow, created space for new beginnings. Karen had found happiness with her new partner. The children were thriving despite the turmoil. And I had discovered a resilience in myself I never knew existed. The double life he hid for a decade had devastated us all. But in its aftermath, we had each found our way to something authentic, lives built not on deception, but on hard-won truth, painful as it sometimes was. And there was power in that, a power that no betrayal, however profound, could take away.